Hey everybody, Michael Novo, Photo with Novo, and today I'm going to be talking about color grading for photographers and why you should be looking into it. Color grading is one of the easiest ways to make your images pop and stand out and have their own unique flavor, and I also think that it's one of the things that's most overlooked. We often are looking for something like an action or some sort of preset to do the coloring for us, but in reality it's much easier to do it ourselves and to make our own actions for it. What is color grading? Essentially, it is altering or enhancing the color of one of your images. Just about every movie out there uses color grading in one way or another. You're not seeing the exact footage straight out of the camera in terms of colors. You're seeing exactly what the director wants you to see, which conveys a mood, story, or emotion. I'll be showing you a few examples. Let's go to the screen. To kick off, here's two finely toned images. This one, of course, pushing a little bit more green and bringing out the oranges. And this one is actually simply just going slightly towards the desaturated, but putting a nice sort of warm glow over it. Don't know if you're able to see that. If that's not your style, how about this one? That's fantastic right there. Anyway, if you want to learn a little bit more and you want to see a little bit in the film industry, go ahead and you can search for this. I'll put this in the description below. The 10 best uses of color in film. If you search for that on YouTube, that will be awesome. Some of the texture packs that you're going to see me use, I get those from a guy named Sergey Ivanov. He's off in the Ukraine. I recommend you check him out in case you want to get some of those. Makes it a little bit easier to color grade your images. And if you want to hang out with me, I'm Michael Novo 9 on Instagram. The first thing that I want to do is to take a look at Adobe's color wheel, and this can help you out quite a bit. So let's go look at that. Let's kick off by going to color.adobe.com, and you can get this color wheel. This is totally free. Just simply access it on their website. And you can come here and play with a whole variety of different colors. This one is the analogous color spectrum. They've got monochromatic in case you want to stay all in the same tone. And then you've got one that we're going to be focused on today is complementary colors. Ooh, let's see what shades are. Shades looks like it's 50 shades of red. Okay, so we're going to be sticking with complementary, and that at the very basics is a great place to start if you've never color graded before, or you're simply just not feeling very comfortable with the idea of toning your images and you don't want them to end up like a badly decorated Christmas tree. Here you can simply spin the wheel and it will tell you what the complementary color is, and there's a reason that you see colors that repeat. One of the most common ones that you see in movies is this sort of teal orange look. It's not necessarily by accident that holiday colors are red and green. They kind of work in that spectrum. You've got the Hulk and his colors, and if we go out to other superheroes, playing the triad here, we can see we start going into these like Superman style colors. So they're used all over the place. Let's go back to complementary. You can play with them all the way from like light pastels, and I'm going to be showing you some movie examples here in just a second of how filmmakers use these colors to put their films together. Now that we've had a chance to play with the color wheel, and if you have a direction that you're looking to go, let's take a look at some examples. Again, I said that the teal orange is sort of one of the most common uses, and that's really for skin tones. I'm sure that you might have heard of that before, but if you haven't, that just makes it an easy, safe choice, and a bunch of the Hollywood films go in that direction. So you can't go wrong toning your images in that direction. Here's another movie. The previous one was Fury Road. Here in Drive, it's actually a little bit reversed. A lot of times we prefer to have the warmer colors closer to us and the cooler colors in the back. Here, they're still using the same color scheme, but now I can see that the warm is in the back, and actually the skin tones have gone a little bit cooler, a little bit more drama and suspense there. Here's another example. This is sort of the classic where you have the cool blue in the back and the warm orange in the front. It may not have this appearance on the web through YouTube, but their skin is definitely oversaturated. In fact, the entire movie kind of felt a little bit pushed too far for me. Red and green is another common complementary color. I'm not sure about this photo here. That would be a whole different conversation as to what's happening with this backdrop. But red and green, you've got the watermelon, which is nature's perfect answer to complementary colors. But it's not always Gallagher that you're going to be doing your color grading on, so here's another example of it in the movie Her, where he wears his red, I don't know if that's a coat, sweater, yeah, coat, and against this kind of green tinted backdrop. And it's a lot of times that if you're just watching the movie, it may not just leap right out at you. It takes an effort, but once you look at this entire back image, you can see that there's green pretty much in every single aspect of it. In fact, here, let me use my sort of color picker, and we can see even in the whites right here, you can see that it's a little bit green. Here's a guy wearing just a white shirt, and even that pushes green. So it definitely exists everywhere. This sort of neutral gray that's back there, the concrete is, everything here is green. Of course, you've got the trees and the buildings in the back. Probably the whitest thing that I can see, but even that, I'm seeing a little bit of green tint in there. Here's another example with the colors much more saturated, because remember, on that color wheel, you can use that slider and both see what they look like in more saturated or desaturated form. Compared to Her, this is, of course, significantly more saturated in the movie Amélie. At least, I think that's how it's pronounced. And one of my favorite directors, Roy Andersson. This, while not necessarily complementary, definitely you could see the color grading impact on there, this kind of bluish and desaturated feel that he loves to have to his images. Not necessarily the color, but that kind of desaturation is sort of a classic look for him. Here's another example of it in a slightly different color spectrum, a little bit more gold copper here. And even my glass of wine is color graded, but I am going to be working on taking it from being red to transparent. Your colors don't have to remain the same the entire time. That's certainly one of the easiest and most common things to do, is to simply color tone all of the images in a series or in a location the same. But if we take a look at Boiler Room, the colors actually help tell part of the story. This is early on in the movie when he's just getting the job, and the colors here are relatively neutral, nothing too exciting. It is a little bit of a shady business that he's getting into, and as the movie goes on, the colors actually begin to shift, especially within this office location that he's in. It goes a little bit more blue, and at the end, when everything is in real crisis mode, you could just see it just goes completely blue. His skin is very pasty. If you watch the movie, I apologize, the screen grabs, the stills are not the highest resolution, but I highly recommend checking out the movie and just watch for those colors as the movie goes along. It just keeps getting progressively more and more saturated towards the blues. Final example where you can see it run across multiple seasons, Breaking Bad. The colors definitely change over time, and it tells a lot about the story and the characters. Now that we've seen the examples, let's take a look at the best ways to apply that within our own images. This is my friend Sveta, who was awesome enough to come out and pose for a few photos, which we did sort of towards the South Side Chinatown area of Chicago. And if we look at the colors here, they're kind of like all over the map. We've got some gray there, it goes really nicely against the black and the red. Blue sky, but there's some green here, but it's kind of all over the place. This image is straight out of the camera. And one thing that I like to do is to first start off with just doing a little bit of the curves adjustment, add in a little bit more contrast into the images. This is just a straightforward little bit of an S-curve that I've added here. You can go more or less, but that kind of begins to do some of the separation for me. It will matter how bright or dark it is behind there in terms of how it comes through, depending on your blending mode. Now, you can simply brush on color with nothing else. Let's just make a new layer. We'll call it just color. And then I'll take my brush tool. Let's pick out a nice warm color for the front. We can go with something like this. And then just simply brush on. I'm using a soft brush, 30% opacity. I prefer to use the opacity versus the flow. And we could just brush on a little bit of warmth in the foreground. And there you go. Same thing goes for the background. I've already got a blue here, but let's just take something that's a little bit darker, and we can just brush on a little bit of blue in the background. Now at the moment, this doesn't look that good, so we're going to change the blending mode to lighten. And that is at least giving us the right direction. Let me show you a completed version of where I already did it with a different color. So here I've already done it. And then of course you can brush it off of your subject, or at least a little bit of it. And so what I like to do when that part is done is to do sort of a finishing touch. You can use at this point any program that you like. There's Color Effects Pro, Alien Skin, and so I think in this case I just used Alien Skin and kind of, at least I think that's, yeah, it's Alien Skin. Just gave it a little bit of a finish at 30% opacity. That kind of helps bind and tie all of the colors together and give the image an overall kind of look. Let me show you again a little bit the before and the after. I do have it a little bit exaggerated. The colors are pushed stronger just so that they come across online. And one more thing that I like to do is to get the subject to pop just a little bit more against the backdrop. And I like to do the lasso lighten tool. Let me show you the final result actually is here, where I've made her a little bit lighter, the background slightly darker, but let me show you how I actually do that. I'm going to stamp all the layers together so that I've got a layer to work on, and essentially I can just simply select the lasso tool and I'll circle the subject, and then after that I'm going to hit Shift F6, which will bring up my feather selection. And this is a little bit of hit or miss. You've got to play with it a little bit. After a while you'll know how much to use, but if I just simply was to adjust the levels, which as such, you're going to see the hard line on her, and that's not good. So instead of that, that's why we do the feather, and we're going to do that. Let's try 125 pixels. I want to lighten her just a little bit, so I'm going to bring up my levels with Control L or Command L, and let's lighten her up just a little bit. And the same thing, I want to darken the background, so I'm going to hit Control or Command Shift I, and that will inverse my selection. I again hit Control L to bring up my levels, and this time I'm going to bring down the backdrop, make that just a little bit darker. So again, this is a little bit exaggerated just for you to be able to see, because you can see a harsher transition here. I would take a little bit more time with this if I was doing this on the image myself, but it just gets the subject to pop just a little bit. Another way to do it, if you don't want to be painting on manual colors, you can certainly have some bokehs. For example, I do have my texture pack from Sergey Ivanov. He's got quite a few different things that are in there, and he's got a number of them. I may take his bokeh, overlay that, and set that to lighten mode, and then kind of tinker with that, just moving it around. This is maybe just a little bit too strong there, so I'm going to both reduce the opacity, maybe give it a little bit of a blur. So let's bring out our Gaussian blur tool, blur that, and now I've got this like sort of orangey overlay over the background. And of course I would do that for the rest of the image as necessary, but here you can see matching background versus a background that's still sort of the original out of camera. Now, there are, of course, plenty of other ways to do it, including doing a full solid color, which I can simply go here and select solid color. And let's pick whatever tone we'd like. Let's say I kind of want to take this a little bit towards this kind of browny look, except I don't want it to just simply remain like that. And this is where you can kind of play with the various blending modes. Let's see, color dodge. And some obviously will look great, and some won't look that great. Hard light's okay, and let's kind of play with that one for a little bit. I want this color to just go into the shadows a little bit, so I don't really need it much in the highlights. I'm going to double click in the blank area over here on the layer. If I just drag the sliders up and down, the problem is that those transitions are just going to be a little bit too harsh. But what I'm trying to do is essentially get the highlights to not really be toned in that kind of yellowy brown. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. That's going to split my slider, and that's going to let me start dragging it off just a little bit. May want it off a little bit less here, so I'm just going to keep on bringing it down. So now it's just going to be affecting, again, this is overdone. This is just going to be affecting the background and the darker areas. Now, of course, this is a little bit overdone on her skin at this point in time. And so, because if we look at the color of her skin, it's definitely a little bit too saturated for me. So one solution, of course, is to bring down the opacity. But why I don't necessarily want to do that is because I start losing that effect on the background. So instead of that, what I would normally do is simply to mask out my subject, and then I'll make a duplicate of the layer. Let's just do it. This is the fast version of it. I would mask out the subject, duplicate that layer, hitting Command or Control J, and then I will click on that mask and inverse it. So now the color is back on her, but I can at this point play with the opacity that will only affect the subject. And again, if I was doing this for real with the client image, I would take my time, because obviously right here you can see that the color shift is too dramatic. So I would get in there with a little bit of a harder brush and do the masking much more accurately. Now let's try doing the same thing with the highlights. Let's turn that layer off for just a second. I'm going to make a duplicate of this layer and turn off the base layer. Now what we're going to do is to pick out a color here to apply to the highlights. Well, which color should we pick? We can start by taking the value of this color and going to the Adobe color wheel and pulling the complementary color. So let's try that. I will take and copy this value, and we'll head over to the color wheel and select complementary and just plug in the color right here. When I hit tab or go to any other square, it gives me the matching color there, and I was playing already in sort of that teal orange arena. I'll copy this value, we'll head back to Photoshop, and then we will plug it in here. Now, of course, this color is too much, and I want it not in the shadows, but just in the highlights. So I'm going to, again, double click on the open area over here. I'm going to put it this slider all the way back. And again, we're going to do the same thing to remove it from the shadows, because I just want it to be in the highlights. And here, I'm going to bring the slider part of the way, because I know I definitely don't want it at all in the shadows. And instead, I want it to feather nice and smooth all the way to the highlights. This is still a little bit too much for me, so at this point in time, I am going to reduce the opacity. Let's bring it down to something like right about there. Give that sky just a little bit more blue, and then we'll bring back the shadows and keep it on her skin tone just a little bit. Now, of course, this is exaggerated. This is overdone. I just want you to be able to see on the web in better detail as to how it's done. I would refine this color a little bit more. I probably would take it away a little bit from the clouds here, maybe even reduce the saturation of this blue. In fact, let's go and do that, because you don't have to necessarily play with it all there. And yeah, that's already looking a little bit better. So that's another way to do it, is just using plain old simple color fill. You don't necessarily have to resort straight away to actions. So then I will take these layers, we'll group them together, and probably just reduce the opacity quite a bit on the entire thing. So now if we look, we can see that there's a little bit of brown all the way through these greens, and that color just kind of continues, this brownish green, a little bit of blue up here. Again, I would play with this a little bit more, but this is just an easy way for you to get started. I don't think that you need to resort to using a lot of actions and presets unless you've made them yourself, because every action set and every preset that's out there is made for a given type of image, or at least an image that's in a certain type of category. Your images may be shot under different circumstances with a different light. It can change from the bulbs that are being used in the room to what time of day it is, to how many clouds there are in the sky. All of these things will have an impact, and that's why it's very difficult for you to get your images to look anything like what you often see in the examples that are posted on the various websites. So I suggest playing a little bit with color grading, and you'd be amazed at how much you can create your own style just from a few simple Photoshop actions. This has been Photo with Novo. I'm Michael Novo. Until next time, if you like this video, click like. If you would like to suggest a new topic, do feel free to add that in the comment section.